Joining me today is Chief Justice Broderick, and we're going to talk about changedirection.org. Justice Broderick, nothing to do sort of with the courts and all of that. Really, it's about this organization you're involved with. And I saw your talk at New England College's Concord Center, and I really thought that'd be a great place to start. So what caused you to get involved to develop this sort of changedirection.org? That's sort of a great, the beginnings are important.
Well, I'll tell you what got me involved, and thanks for having me on. This campaign was designed by a child psychologist, Barbara Van Dalen. She lives in Maryland. It's a national campaign with the first statewide launch. Why did I get involved? About 12 years ago, my family, while I was serving on the state Supreme Court, went through a journey in mental illness that I would not wish on anyone. And it was largely because I didn't know what mental health was or what the signs were or that could ever affect my family. I realized how foolish that was. It affects many families, all of whom are ashamed and afraid.
And it's sort of, it's kept quiet and isolated.
It is, and we've all learned that culture. I grew up in that culture. And it hurt my family that I did because I wasn't very informed. And when my oldest son, who's now a full adult, was 13 years old, he was affected by mental health problems. I didn't see it, he didn't know it. That's very common, by the way. And we blamed it on all sorts of things, none of which were accurate. Really smart, he's a good person, I love him. When he went away to college, he started drinking heavily. When he went to graduate school, drinking was really impeding his everyday life. And so they told my wife and I that my son was an alcoholic. He was never an alcoholic, but I accepted that. He denied it, but they said, no, every alcoholic says they're not an alcoholic. We finally had to make a choice, which I hope nobody watching this ever has to make. The choice was you can put your son on the street, hopefully he'll hit bottom and come back, or you can leave him in your house and he'll die drinking in your house. My son's really smart, really talented. It was a nightmare. And so my wife and I, feeling we were doing the right thing after rehab didn't work, we put him on the street. It was a hard choice. It was the worst decision we ever could have made as a family. My son's underlying mental health problems exploded, and he didn't know he had those problems. We saw drinking. Finally, we couldn't take it anymore. We just couldn't. And we brought him home knowing what they had told us, that he might die drinking in our house. And he still was drinking when he came home, and he knew that's why we had put him out. And he was scared to death we might do that again to him, and so he assaulted me. And I ended up at the Elliott Hospital ICU. I didn't know that then. And my son ended up, my master's educated son, ended up at the Valley Street Jail. And after about 7 days, I got to my own private room. My wife told me as best she knew what had happened, and we both cried. I've been a lawyer and a judge for most of my adult life, and the idea that my son was in jail, and I knew what it would mean for him and for us and for his brother. And my wife is an amazingly courageous person, and she pulled us through that. My son was devastated that he had done this to me. I mean, my heart ached for him, and I thought it was alcohol. My son was sentenced to the state prison. I don't wish that day on any family. And since I was on the Supreme Court, it got a lot of attention. My doctors went on the Today Show. People magazine wanted to talk to my wife. Thank goodness she didn't do that. How she survived, I don't know. How my son survived, I don't know. And finally, when he went to the prison for 3 years, we met with the head psychiatrist, and he said to us, let me tell you what's going on with your son, Judge. He said, your son is severely depressed and has panic and anxiety attacks that are almost off the charts. If you had his problems, he told me, and I told you a 6-pack of beer every day would give you some relief, you might resist initially, but you'd eventually be drinking.
So what we were seeing was what they call codependency.
Yes.
The alcohol consumption was a symptom.
Absolutely, absolutely. And no one ever said codependency, co-occurring, no one. no pediatrician, no primary care doctor, no alcohol expert. I assume that's different today, I hope so. So we saw a unitary problem and we made a bad decision. We were treating a symptom, not a cause. And he said to us that day, I really like your son, Judge. He's talented and funny. And I said, I love my son. But I knew that day that we had failed him, but I didn't know that. And my wife and I felt like we had not been very good parents. And we left that day, and the psychiatrist said, I'm going to try to work with your son. I wasn't optimistic. In about 60 days, we went to one of the visits. You could visit once a week. And he came into the visiting room, and he gave us both a big hug. He said, Dad, I didn't know you could feel like this. I said, what do you mean like this? He said, good, Dad, like I feel. I haven't felt like this since I was a child. I can sleep, I can eat, I can focus. I'm teaching at the prison. He took 3 pills a day, and it transformed his life. He was married in the prison, my son was, and I say to your viewers, don't do wedding planning in the prison. I wouldn't recommend it. It's inexpensive, but it's not a great environment. The photographer was an inmate with a Polaroid camera, and as weird as it sounds, it was a wonderful moment. And I performed the wedding in a conference room off the main visiting room, and my son's wife had gotten her master's degree with him in Boston. She later won an Emmy in New England for her work on film and film editing. She was twice nominated. I've held the Emmy statue. It's pretty impressive. They have an 8-year-old daughter who, as a grandfather, I'm totally objective, of course.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Even if I weren't totally objective, she's a beautiful, I mean, just stunning. And every time I hug that child, I think you're a miracle. When my son was released from the prison, I was Chief Justice, so that got some attention. And they sent a camera crew up that day and put a microphone under my chin and said, so what do you have to say? I said, we're really excited my son's coming home, but I want people to know something. My son's not a bad person who's now a good person. He's always been a good person. He's now well. And those are very different things. My son, who drank every day for 12 years, hasn't had a drink in a decade. He said to me, Dad, if you put me in a liquor store overnight, I'd have a Coca-Cola. That's all. I don't have that tug anymore. I feel so different now. I didn't know you could feel like this. And so I went back to work on the court, even though it had been very public, nationally public. I didn't talk about it. That's the world I grew up in. And nobody talked to me about it, because what would they say? And then this campaign came along to change direction on mental health. Nonpartisan, non-political public awareness, and I was asked if I'd co-chair it with Peter Evers, who runs Riverbend Community Health in Concord, and Bill Gunn, who's the head of behavioral health at the Concord Hospital. And so I thought, sure, hiding doesn't help anyone. And so we started last May. We launched it in an empty House chamber in Concord, which has 400 seats. In case you think we don't have enough state reps, we have 400. But it was empty that day. And I wasn't sure how many people would show up for this. It's just nonpartisan, non-political, Monday morning at 10 a.m. 425 people came. And I knew that morning that it wasn't just my family that had suffered. Business leaders, hospital CEOs, the Catholic bishop, the Episcopal Church, 3 members of the Supreme Court. I'd never been in a room like it. But what's most stunning about it, what I want your viewers to understand, is Barbara Van Dalen, the genius behind this campaign, stood up that morning in that chamber and asked this question. If there's anyone here this morning who's been untouched by mental illness, themselves, their family, their friends, if you've been untouched, please raise your hand.
No one raised their hand.
No hand went up. Not one hand went up. And I said to Barbara, how is that happening? She said, John, that's the reaction I get everywhere I go, because people want to conceal it and hide it. And that's what this campaign is trying to do. It's trying to say to people what no one's ever said in our society, which is, it's not okay to have mental health problems. We do say that. But we never say, but it's okay to have a mental health problem. We just stop after the first okay. It's not okay. And so since then, I've been around the state, traveled over 12,000 miles. I've invited myself nowhere. And my assistant told me as of last week, I've spoken 105 times. And I have many more speeches lined up because people want to hear this message and they want to change the culture.
Well, we'll have to stop there. When we return, we're going to find out more about Change Direction New Hampshire, so please stay with us.